A lost wallet on a cracked Bronx sidewalk. A 10-year-old boy with nothing but a worn backpack and a mother's lesson to always do what's right. When Eli picked up that wallet, he thought he was just returning cash. He didn't know he was about to uncover a hidden family, ignite a citywide movement, and change countless lives, including his own. This isn't just a story about honesty. It's about how one small act can ripple into a legacy no one saw coming. You won't believe where it leads. The wallet was old, with creases worn deep into the leather and faded stitching that had held together too long. It sat wedged between a rusted bench and a trash can outside the corner store, unnoticed by the dozens of hurried passers-by, but not by Eli. The boy, no more than 10, paused mid-step, sneakers scuffed and damp from morning puddles. He crouched, eyes narrowing in curiosity, and reached for the object with the careful fingers of someone who knew what it meant to find something valuable. He looked around first, the way someone always does when they stumble on a forgotten object. The sidewalk bustled, but no one met his gaze. With a flicker of hesitation, Eli picked it up and turned it over in his hands. It wasn't heavy. He opened it slowly, as if worried it might crumble from age. Inside were 220s, a driver's license, and a photograph that fluttered to the pavement. Eli bent and picked up the photo. 2 people, a man and a woman, dressed in formal clothes. Their smiles were small, like they weren't used to joy. The man in the photo matched the face on the ID, Thomas Granger, address, Upper East Side. Eli frowned. The address wasn't just far, it was a world away. His own world was a 2-room apartment, 4 subway stops, and a long walk from anything with marble floors or doormen. His mother worked 2 jobs, barely home before dark. His jacket barely kept out the wind anymore, and the socks he wore were mismatched from the church's donation bin. Returning the wallet wasn't about a reward. It was about doing what was right. That's what his mother had taught him, even when they had next to nothing. He stared at the ID again. The man looked important. The kind of important Eli couldn't put words to, but could feel in the angles of the man's suit and the gleam of his tie pin in the photo. The name scratched at something in the back of his mind. He'd heard it before, maybe on TV, maybe in school. He wasn't sure. He tucked the wallet carefully into his backpack and adjusted the frayed straps over his shoulders. He'd return it, somehow, even if it meant riding the subway into parts of the city where he didn't belong. Eli waited until after school. The tiny building with peeling paint and uneven floors let out in a trickle of kids who scattered like birds the moment the bell rang. He didn't wait for anyone. He didn't have anyone to wait for. Instead, he crossed the street, ducked into the bodega for a quick glance at the map taped to the fridge behind the counter, then headed toward the subway station with the kind of grim determination most kids his age reserved for video games or playground rivalries. The train rumbled beneath the city, its cars filled with people speaking into phones, listening to music, staring blankly ahead. Eli sat still, clutching his backpack tightly. Each stop pulled him deeper into the parts of New York City he'd only seen from afar, the places where the buildings sparkled like movie sets, and even the sidewalks seemed polished. His reflection in the subway window looked small, not scared, just small. When he finally emerged onto a clean, tree-lined street, he stopped. The buildings here reached the sky with confidence. Doormen stood at attention outside golden lobbies. Cars gleamed at the curb like showroom pieces. Eli had to check the address 3 times before he found the right building. It stood like a quiet giant, the kind of place where people had meetings in suits and elevators that whispered rather than clanked. He approached the front desk inside, unsure of the rules. A man in a dark blazer looked up from a computer, raising an eyebrow at Eli's torn backpack and worn shoes. "Can I help you, kid?" Eli nodded and stepped closer, pulling the wallet from his bag like it was a fragile artifact. "I found this," he said quietly. "It belongs to Mr. Granger. I just want to give it back." The man hesitated, then reached for the wallet, scanning the ID. His eyes widened slightly, and he looked at Eli with new scrutiny. "Wait here," he said. Eli did. A few minutes passed. Then the elevator chimed, and the doorman gestured for Eli to come forward. "Mr. Granger said to bring you up." Eli's heart pounded. He followed the man into the elevator, and they rode in silence, the numbers above the door climbing higher than any building he'd ever been in. When they stopped, the doors opened onto a hallway lined with soft carpet and elegant light fixtures. The doorman stepped aside, and Eli walked forward toward the only open door. Inside, the apartment was enormous. Walls of glass looked out over the city skyline. Art hung in heavy frames. A man stood by the window, his back turned. But as Eli stepped inside, he turned around. It was him, the man from the photo, from the ID. Thomas Granger. He was older in person, taller than Eli expected, stern. His gaze dropped immediately to the wallet in Eli's hand. "You found this?" Eli nodded. "Outside a corner store, on the ground. I thought maybe—" Granger stepped forward and took the wallet gently. "And you came all the way here, alone?" "Yes, sir." Granger opened the wallet, his fingers quick and practiced, then paused. His eyes lingered on the photograph Eli had tucked back inside. For a moment something flickered in his face. Loss, maybe? Or guilt? "I didn't take anything," Eli said quickly. "I just wanted to return it." "I can see that." Granger set the wallet down and studied Eli more closely now. "What's your name?" "Eli." "Eli what?" "Eli Martinez." Granger's expression didn't change, but something about the name seemed to register. He crossed to a cabinet and pulled out a small box, then returned to Eli. "Here," he said, "for your honesty." Eli looked down. It was money, several crisp $100 bills. "I don't need a reward," Eli said quickly. I thought you'd want it back." "I do, but this isn't about need. It's about recognition." He paused. "You're a good kid, Eli Martinez." Eli hesitated. "Thank you. I should go." Granger nodded. "Let me walk you to the elevator." They rode down in silence. At the lobby, Granger placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Wait," he said. "Do you live nearby?" "No, South Bronx." Granger frowned. "That's quite the journey." Eli shrugged. "I've done harder things." Granger knelt slightly, meeting the boy's eyes. "Why'd you do it? Really?" Eli blinked. "Because it was the right thing to do. My mom says we don't get to choose how much we have, but we do get to choose what we do with it." Granger straightened slowly, like the weight of those words settled somewhere unexpected in his chest. He nodded. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is." "I'd like to meet her." Eli froze. "Why?" Granger looked down at the wallet in his hand, then back at Eli. "Because a long time ago, I knew someone named Maria Martinez, and I think she was my sister." The world tilted slightly. Eli's breath caught in his throat. His mother never talked about her family, said there was nothing worth remembering. But Granger's eyes shone with a different truth. "I don't know if it's possible," he said softly, "but if your mother's name is Maria, and she once lived in Brooklyn, then I think you might be my nephew." Eli couldn't speak. The wallet had led him here, but this was something else entirely. Granger smiled. "Come back tomorrow. Bring your mom, please?" Eli nodded slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in like the chill before snow. He turned and stepped outside, the city suddenly unfamiliar and full of new possibilities. He clutched the backpack tight again, but not out of fear. This time, he carried something else entirely. Eli couldn't sleep that night. His thin blanket barely kept the chill from the cracked window at bay, but it wasn't the cold that kept his eyes wide open in the dark. It was the name, Thomas Granger. It had rolled around in his head like a marble on a wood floor, refusing to settle. After returning home, he'd barely touched the small portion of leftover rice and beans his mother reheated for him. She'd noticed his silence but hadn't pried. Maria Martinez had long since learned that her son would speak when ready. Now, hours later, as the streetlight flickered outside and distant sirens wailed through the concrete canyons, Eli sat up. He looked across the room to where his mother slept soundly, her hand curled under her cheek. The lines on her face had deepened in the last few years, more from worry than time. She worked 2 jobs, mornings at the diner, evenings cleaning offices. They didn't talk much about what they didn't have. He thought about the photograph in the wallet again, the way Granger's fingers had trembled when he held it. And then those words, "I think she was my sister." He had never known his mother had a brother, a family. She never spoke of her childhood, never told bedtime stories about where she came from. Eli had stopped asking when he was 6 and got nothing but a soft look and a quiet, "Some stories don't help us sleep." Now he had a new piece of that story, one she hadn't given him. When morning came, he waited until she was almost done getting ready. Her diner uniform was faded, the name tag barely legible. She brushed a strand of hair back from her forehead and fastened her shoes without sitting down. "Mom?" She paused. "Yes, mijo?" "I found a wallet yesterday." That caught her attention. She turned, concern flickering in her dark eyes. "Did you keep it?" "No," he said quickly. "I returned it, to the guy it belonged to. He lived way up on the east side." "You went all the way up there?" Her voice rose a notch. "I had to. It felt important." He hesitated. "His name was Thomas Granger." Her breath caught audibly, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she slowly sank onto the edge of the bed. "What did you say?" "Thomas Granger," Eli repeated. "I gave back his wallet. He said he thinks you're his sister." And then filled the small apartment like a thunderclap. Maria stared at her son, her mouth parting slightly, her hands limp in her lap. Eli had never seen her like this, not when they'd lost their first place, not even when the electricity got shut off for a week last winter. "You knew him?" Eli asked gently. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Tommy." She stared past him, through the cracked window, through the building across the alley to somewhere far away. Then, slowly, her eyes returned to his. "He's my brother," she said finally. "He was my brother." "Was? I haven't seen him in over 20 years. Eli sat beside her. "He wants to see you. He asked me to bring you today." She looked away. "No." "But—" "No," she said again, more firmly this time. "That part of my life is over." Eli stared at her, confused. "But he was nice. He remembered you. He gave me money, but not in a weird way. He just wanted to talk." Maria rubbed her hands over her face. "You don't understand, Eli. When I left that house, I left everything behind for a reason." "What reason?" "I was 17, she said. "Tommy and we were close once, but our parents weren't like me. They weren't like you. They believed in image, in status. They wanted us to become things, not people. I didn't fit their plan." Eli didn't say anything. "I got pregnant with you," she said softly. "I was working at a coffee shop. Tommy had already started college. I told my parents. They threw me out that night. Said I'd shamed them." Eli's heart stuttered. "But he said he thought you were gone." "I never told him," she admitted. "I didn't want him to try and fix it. He was just a kid, too. I thought I'd be fine on my own. I was proud. And I was scared." Eli processed that, the pieces slotting into place like the last edges of a puzzle. "I think he thought you died," Eli said finally, "or ran away for good. He looked sad, not angry. Sad." Maria swallowed. "You told him my name?" "I didn't have to. He remembered." She stood abruptly and began pacing. "This is a mistake. That life. It doesn't want us." "Maybe it does now," Eli said. "Or maybe he does. Isn't that enough to find out?" Maria stopped, looked at him, and for the first time her expression softened, not in fear, but in longing. She sighed. "All right," she said. "I'll go, but only to talk." They arrived at the same building just after noon, Eli led the way, his small hand gripping his mother's like he had when he was 5 and afraid of the dark. Maria wore the nicest clothes she owned, a floral blouse and pressed jeans. She looked painfully out of place in the glass and gold lobby, but Eli held his head high, as if daring anyone to make her feel small. The doorman remembered them. He nodded, spoke into a small earpiece, and then waved them toward the elevator. On the top floor, the door opened to the same grand hallway. Eli looked up at his mother. She didn't move. "You okay?" he asked. "No," she whispered. But she stepped forward anyway. The door was already open. Thomas Granger stood inside, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, his expression unreadable. When he saw Maria, something fractured across his face. He took a single step forward, then stopped, as if afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast. "Maria," he said. She nodded. "Tommy." And then, without warning, they were hugging. Clumsy, long, the kind of hug that starts with hesitation and ends with 20 years of pain pressing together in silence. Eli watched as the dam of time cracked around them, spilling stories and tears and questions too heavy to carry alone. They talked for hours, on the balcony, in the sun-drenched living room, over water and sandwiches no one ate. Maria told her story. Thomas told his, how he'd searched, how he'd blamed himself, how he'd inherited the fortune but never felt whole, how he never stopped wondering what happened to the sister who had disappeared from his life like a ghost. By the time the sun dipped low over the skyline, Eli had fallen asleep on the plush sofa. Maria tucked a blanket around him, smoothing his hair with a gentleness that broke Thomas's heart all over again. "He's good," she said. "Smart, honest. I've tried to raise him right." "You did," Thomas said. "You really did." Maria turned to him. "Why didn't you look for me?" "I did," he said. "But I had nothing to go on. You vanished. I didn't even know about Eli until yesterday." She nodded. "I wanted to protect him from everything I ran from. You don't have to run anymore." The silence that followed felt like peace. "I want to be part of his life," Thomas said. "Yours, too, if you'll let me." Maria didn't answer right away. She stared at the boy on the couch, then out at the city she'd battled so long. "Maybe," she said, "maybe we all deserve a second chance." That night they took a cab home together, Eli still half asleep but smiling. The wallet sat on the table back in Thomas's penthouse, worn but whole, a symbol of what was lost and what had finally been found. The next morning, Eli woke up with a full heart and a dizzy head. He blinked against the thin stripe of sunlight seeping through the blinds and rolled over, pulling the blanket to his chin. For a moment he thought it had all been a dream. Finding the wallet, the grand apartment, his mother standing face to face with a man who called her sister with such certainty and pain that Eli had to look away. But the small white card on the nightstand reminded him it had been real. The address. The handwritten note. "Come back any time. We have years to catch up." His mother stood in the kitchen, flipping pancakes. She rarely made breakfast unless she had the day off or was trying to soothe something too big for words. She didn't say anything at first, just glanced at him with a tired but peaceful expression. "You hungry?" Eli nodded. "Starving." They ate in silence. The cheap syrup they always used tasted sweeter somehow. When the plate was cleared and her coffee was half gone, Maria finally spoke. "He wants to help," she said quietly. "Your uncle." Eli didn't know what to say. "I told him no," she continued. "At first, I told him we were fine." "But we're not," Eli whispered. Maria's shoulders sagged, the truth too heavy to dodge. "No, mijo, we're not." She didn't cry, but her voice caught like it had hit something sharp. "He said he wants to pay for your school," she added after a moment. "He said he has connections at one of those private academies, uniforms, fancy classrooms, the whole thing." Eli's eyes widened. "Like with science labs and books that aren't 10 years old?" She smiled, just barely. "And lockers you don't have to share with a broom." They laughed. The sound felt foreign in the cramped kitchen, like something fragile rediscovering its place. I told him I'd think about it, she said. But it's not just about money, Eli. It's about what comes with it, the people, the expectations. That world, it chewed me up once. I won't let it do that to you. I'm not afraid, Eli said. I know, she replied. That's what scares me. Later that day, they returned to Thomas's apartment. The doorman greeted them with a polite nod, and this time Maria walked in without hesitation. Thomas was waiting, dressed in jeans and a sweater, looking far less like the powerful man from the newspaper articles and more like a brother trying to make up for lost time. I booked us dinner tonight, he said after greeting them. Someplace quiet, just the three of us. Maria raised an eyebrow. Dinner out? Eli looked between them. Can we really go? Of course we can, Thomas said. You're family. The restaurant sat at the edge of Central Park, tucked beneath ivy-covered walls and flickering lamps. Inside, the lights were low and the tables spaced like islands. A waiter with perfect posture led them to a private corner and poured water like it was a ceremony. Eli looked around in awe. This place has napkins made of cloth. Thomas laughed. Yes, and no ketchup bottles on the table, I'm afraid. I don't even see salt. It's probably on the wine list, Maria muttered. They read menus none of them truly understood. Eventually, Thomas ordered for everyone. When the food arrived, it was art on a plate. Tiny pieces of something unpronounceable balanced atop even tinier leaves. Eli took a cautious bite. Then another. This is chicken? Technically, Thomas said. It tastes rich. That's the truffle oil. Maria raised her glass. To new beginnings, she said. Thomas clinked his glass to hers. To family. Back at the apartment, Thomas showed them the guest rooms, plural. I want you to feel welcome here, whenever you visit. Maria walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the bookshelf, the edge of the bed, the windowsill. Eli watched her. She didn't cry, but her eyes stayed wet the whole time. I've been thinking, Thomas said later, when Maria went to the bathroom and Eli stood by the window. About you. Eli turned. Me? Thomas nodded. You've got guts and a good heart. I think we could do something with that. Eli didn't understand. I run a foundation, Thomas explained. Scholarships, internships, mentorship programs. We help kids who don't get chances. Eli looked down at his shoes. I'm not a genius or anything. That's not what makes people great, Thomas said. It's not about test scores. It's about what kind of person you are when no one's watching. You proved that the moment you picked up that wallet. Eli didn't answer. But the pride that filled his chest said everything. Weeks passed, then months. Eli started at the new school in the fall, wearing a too-stiff blazer and polished shoes that pinched his toes. The campus was massive. Libraries with touchscreens, labs with 3D printers, classrooms that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. He felt small, but not afraid. Maria got a new job. Thomas helped, of course, but she insisted on earning it. Administrative work at a local nonprofit, good hours, health insurance, a proper office. They moved to a better apartment, still modest but clean and warm and safe. The kind of place with windows that shut all the way and a stove that didn't hiss. Thomas became a fixture in their lives. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional dinner where he brought awkward, expensive gifts and always remembered Eli's favorite color or the kind of books he liked best. But he never pushed, never made them feel bought. One day after school, Eli walked into Thomas's office. The windows behind his desk cast golden rectangles of light across the carpet. I found this today, Eli said, holding up an old toy car from his backpack. It was my dad's. My mom said he gave it to her before he left. Thomas reached out, cradling the car in his palm. It's heavier than it looks. I thought maybe, Eli hesitated, maybe you could keep it, just for a while. Thomas smiled. Only if I can give you something in return. He opened his drawer and pulled out the wallet, the same one Eli had returned all those months ago. I've had this patched, Thomas said. Didn't want to lose it again. Eli took it, surprised at the weight. Now we're even, Thomas said. Eli grinned. Almost. They stood there a moment longer, two people tied not by blood alone, but by something far more powerful. Choice. And the decision, again and again, to be part of each other's story. From a lost wallet to a family found. Spring arrived quietly, threading warm breezes through the concrete jungle and coaxing blooms from sidewalk planters and park trees alike. For the first time in years, Eli felt like the city was not just a maze of obstacles, but a place full of hidden doors he could now open. He no longer counted train transfers or worried whether dinner would be enough. Things had changed, not all at once, but steadily, like water wearing away stone. He'd been at the academy for almost 5 months, and though the halls were filled with polished shoes and polished words, Eli had learned to find his place among the marble and mahogany. He made a few friends, Jason, who was obsessed with space and had a telescope in his bedroom, and Rachel, who could draw animals so lifelike they seemed ready to leap off the page. Eli didn't feel the same kind of loneliness that used to curl around his chest during lunch in his old school. Thomas Granger kept his promise, not just in the grand gestures, but in the quiet ones. He showed up. He read the science fair project Eli worked on for weeks. He helped him build a model of the Brooklyn Bridge using toothpicks and fishing wire. He gave him a vintage compass and said, "Just in case you get lost." But what surprised Eli the most was how much his mother changed. Maria smiled more. Not wide, not often, but enough that Eli noticed. She kept her hair neater, started wearing earrings again, even painted her nails a soft lilac once, just because she said the color made her feel like she wasn't invisible. They still had their little apartment in Queens, but it felt brighter now, warmer, as if sunlight stayed longer just for them. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Thomas invited them both over for dessert. Eli didn't expect anything different, maybe a new flavor of gelato, or another attempt at making his uncle laugh at, a silly joke from school. But when they arrived, Thomas wasn't in the living room. A faint melody came from down the hall. A soft, aching piece played on the piano. Eli followed the sound and stopped short. Thomas sat at a grand piano, his fingers gliding across the keys. He looked different in that moment, unguarded, like a man letting himself be seen for the first time. The music was sad, but not hopeless. It was full of memory. When he finished, the silence afterward was like a breath held too long. "I didn't know you played," Eli said quietly. Thomas turned. "Not often, but I learned when I was young. Our mother insisted on it." Maria stood in the doorway, watching him with an expression Eli couldn't name. Not sorrow, not quite, maybe reverence. "That was her favorite," she said. Thomas nodded. "I remembered." Eli didn't know what to say, so he walked to the side of the piano and sat on the bench beside Thomas. "Can I learn?" Thomas looked at him with surprise. "You want to?" Eli shrugged. "You said you'd teach me chess. You never said you wouldn't teach piano." Thomas chuckled. "All right, then." They spent an hour going over scales. Eli's fingers fumbled, the notes clunky, but he didn't care. The idea of learning something so old, so beautiful, from someone who once felt like a stranger, made every sour note worth it. Later that night, as they prepared to leave, Thomas walked them to the door. He hesitated, then reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I've been working on something," he said, offering it to Maria. She took it with careful hands and read silently. Her eyes widened. "This is a trust," he said, "for Eli, for his education, his future. I've also named you co-executor." Maria looked at him with more weight than words could carry. "You didn't have to. I know. But I want to. You don't owe me anything, Maria, but I owe you, for raising him, for surviving when I couldn't find you, for being the sister I should have protected better." Tears welled in her eyes, but didn't fall. "You found us. That's enough." Thomas reached out and pulled her into a hug, one that didn't tremble with hesitation like before. This one was solid, steady. On the subway ride home, Eli leaned against his mother's shoulder, the trust paper tucked carefully in her purse. The train lights flickered, and Eli looked up at her. "Do you think we're different now?" he asked. Maria turned to him. "How do you mean? Like, are we still us? Or are we changing too much?" She smiled gently. "We're still us, baby. Just a version of us that doesn't have to fight every minute." "I think I like this version," he murmured. "So do I." Days turned into weeks, and weeks into spring's full bloom. Eli continued his lessons. He started writing a short story for a school contest about a boy who finds a magic compass and follows it into a hidden city beneath New York. His teacher praised the creativity, but what stuck with Eli most was Thomas's reaction when he read it. "You have a voice," he said. "Don't let anyone take it from you." That sentence became Eli's anchor. Then, one Sunday afternoon, something unexpected happened. They received an invitation in the mail, elegant, thick parchment with gold edges. "The Granger Foundation invites you to its annual gala. Guests of honor, Maria Martinez and Eli Martinez." Maria almost dropped the card when she read it. "He's gone mad." But Eli grinned. "You've never been to a gala before, have you?" She looked at him, still stunned. "Have you?" "Nope, but I bet they'll have napkins made of cloth again." When the night arrived, Maria wore a dress Thomas had helped her pick out, a soft blue that matched the skyline at dusk. Eli wore a suit, not rented, not borrowed, his. As they stepped out of the town car and onto the red carpet, camera flashes popped like summer lightning. Thomas was already there, waiting with a calm smile, his hand extended toward them like they belonged to him. And in a way they did. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers glittered overhead and tables gleamed with crystal and silver. People murmured and turned to look as they entered, curious about the woman and boy at the side of New York's famously private billionaire. Thomas took the stage later that evening, his voice confident and warm. "Years ago, I started this foundation because I believed in potential," he said. "But I was wrong about something. Potential doesn't exist in theory. It lives in people, in courage, in honesty. And sometimes it lives in a 10-year-old boy who returns a lost wallet, not knowing it belongs to the uncle he's never met." The audience stirred, murmured. "That boy reminded me what it means to hope, and his mother reminded me what it means to forgive." He gestured toward them. "Please welcome my family." Eli didn't remember getting to his feet, or the applause, or the tears slipping silently down his mother's cheeks. He only remembered Thomas's hand on his shoulder and the certainty that he belonged. The rest of the evening passed like a dream. But long after the music faded and the lights dimmed, long after the guests went home and the glittering city fell asleep, Eli stood by the apartment window, looking out. He still had the compass, still had the wallet, now framed on his bookshelf. And he knew, with a certainty stronger than gravity, that he had found not just a path, but a purpose, one that had started with a small act of honesty and led to everything. Summer brought longer days, and with it, a slower rhythm that Eli had never experienced before. There was no panic in the mornings, no frantic search for clean clothes or the fear that he'd miss the school bus because his mother's second shift had run too late. Instead, the sun greeted them like an old friend. The air was filled with the smells of street vendors, sidewalk gardens, and the faint whisper of music drifting from rooftop patios. It had been nearly a year since Eli found that worn wallet wedged against the bench. A year since he'd met Thomas Granger and unknowingly walked into the heart of a family he never knew he had. He still remembered the way the wallet had felt in his hand, worn, soft, unassuming, just like the boy who'd picked it up. He didn't know then what it would mean, that it would peel back layers of history and silence, that it would not only bring them into Thomas's penthouse, but into his life, into his heart. They'd celebrated Eli's 11th birthday 2 months ago. It had been a modest party by Thomas's standards, but magical in every way. Thomas rented out a small space at the Museum of Natural History, Eli's favorite place, and arranged for a private tour. Maria baked cupcakes herself, refusing to let caterers touch that part of her son's life. Jason and Rachel came, along with a few other classmates, and even a couple of Eli's teachers. Thomas gave Eli a new digital camera, sleek and compact, with a memory card big enough to capture an entire childhood. On the inside of the strap, engraved in tiny silver letters, were the words, "See the world and never stop telling your story." Eli hadn't put the camera down since. He took pictures of everything: strangers on the subway, rain puddles on cracked sidewalks, pigeons mid-flight, and once a man asleep on a park bench with a tiny dog curled into his side. Thomas had begun printing his favorites and framing them around his office. Maria teased that her son was becoming the youngest gallery artist on the Upper East Side. This morning, Thomas had invited them to lunch at a small cafe near Bryant Park, the kind of place where the waiters knew his name and every napkin was folded like origami. As they sat at a sun-drenched table, sipping lemonade and waiting for their food, Thomas looked at Eli with a quiet smile. "You've changed," he said. Eli blinked. "How?" "You walk taller. You look people in the eye. You speak like you believe your words matter." Maria reached over and brushed a crumb from Eli's collar. "He's always mattered." Thomas nodded. "I just wish I'd found him sooner." Eli shrugged, a motion that had become his way of deflecting emotion too big for his chest. "I found you." Thomas leaned forward. "Can I tell you something?" Eli nodded. "That day you returned my wallet. I had just come back from my lawyer's office. I was updating my will." He paused, eyes unreadable. "I didn't have any family listed. No one. Just charities. Foundations. Nothing personal." Eli felt a strange twist in his stomach. "I remember thinking, when I go there won't be anyone who remembers me for who I really was, just what I owned. And then," he smiled softly, "there you were, a kid with a tattered backpack and more honesty in your voice than I'd heard in decades." Eli looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "That moment changed everything," Thomas said. Maria reached over and took her son's hand. "And it changed us." Their food arrived, and the moment passed like a cloud sliding over sunlight. But Eli knew something unspoken had settled into the space between them. Trust, maybe, or destiny. After lunch, they walked through the park. Eli darted ahead with his camera, capturing the way the breeze lifted his mother's hair, or the way Thomas's reflection warped slightly in the glass of a food cart window. Then something caught his eye. On a nearby bench sat a man in his 40s, looking tired and lost, his eyes darting nervously toward the pavement. He stood up quickly and walked away. But in his hurry, something fell from his coat pocket, a wallet. Eli froze. The wallet didn't look exactly like Thomas's had, but it was similar. Worn, leather, used. Eli looked at Thomas and Maria, then back at the wallet. Slowly he walked over, picked it up, and looked around. The man was already disappearing into the crowd. He hesitated, then turned toward the bench and sat down. Thomas and Maria approached cautiously. "Everything okay?" Maria asked. Eli opened the wallet. Inside were a few bills, a faded photo of a woman and child, and an ID. "Stephen Callahan," he read. Thomas took the wallet gently from his hands. "Do you want to run after him?" Eli thought about it, then shook his head. "Maybe not this time." Thomas nodded. "Let's turn it in." Eli smiled. He stood, the wallet safe in his hands, and walked with them to the nearest precinct. The officer behind the counter took down the information, and Eli made sure to spell the name correctly. As they stepped back into the sunlight, Maria looked at him. "You didn't hesitate." "I remembered how it felt," Eli said, "doing the right thing." Thomas chuckled. "You're consistent." Eli looked up at him. "Is that good?" "It's the best thing a person can be." That night, back home in their cozy apartment, Eli printed out the photo he'd taken earlier, the one of his mother laughing just before Thomas leaned in to whisper something that made her smile. He pinned it to the wall beside his desk. Next to it was a shadow box that held the original wallet, the one that started it all. He didn't look at it every day anymore, but some nights like tonight, he did. And every time he smiled, because he knew that some things fall into our lives so we can choose what to do with them. And sometimes when we choose honesty over ease, kindness over apathy, we don't just change someone else's life. We find our own. Fall descended on the city with golden light and the crisp scent of burning leaves. The trees lining the streets blazed with color, their canopies casting patterns on the sidewalk like stained glass. Eli zipped his jacket all the way up and stuffed his hands in his pockets as he walked home from school, his backpack bouncing gently against his shoulders. It had been a year now since the day he'd bent down and picked up a forgotten wallet on the sidewalk. That moment had rerouted the trajectory of his life more than he could have imagined. He thought about it often, not just the moment itself, but the seconds before it, how ordinary they were. The scrape of his sneakers on the pavement, the sound of traffic, his own breath in the cool air. And then that glint of worn leather, that tiny spark that led him to the truth about his family, about himself. Now, nearly a year later, he wasn't just Eli Martinez from the Bronx. He was Thomas Granger's nephew. He was a scholarship student at a private school. He was a photographer with a growing portfolio. And he was, for the first time in his life, someone who could envision a future without fear or limitation. At home, Maria was setting the table. Their new apartment was still modest, but the walls were bright with framed photos and colorful rugs. A small potted plant sat in the window, thriving under her care. "You're home early," she said, glancing at the clock. "Miss Campbell canceled chess club." Maria raised an eyebrow. "That the same Miss Campbell who told me last month you were beating her in 5 moves?" Eli shrugged, grinning. "I've been studying openings. Mr. Blake showed me a few new ones." She plated 2 bowls of arroz con pollo and set them on the table. "Thomas still working late?" "He said he had a foundation meeting." Eli didn't mention that Thomas had recently invited him to sit in on some of the planning sessions. The foundation had taken a new direction lately, shifting focus toward youth mentorship and art programs. Eli's input hadn't just been tolerated, it had been encouraged. "Eat," Maria said gently, "before it gets cold." They sat, the quiet rhythm of their meal broken only by the occasional clink of a fork. The air felt full of unsaid things. "You're distracted," Maria said eventually. Eli paused mid-bite. Do you think we've changed too much?" Maria leaned back in her chair, studying him. "I think change is what happens when you grow," she said. "You plant a seed, you water it, you let it stretch toward the sun." Eli chewed slowly, considering that. "But I also think we've held on to the most important parts of ourselves." He looked up. "Like what?" "Like kindness," she said. "Like how you always walk Mrs. Douglas's dog when her hip acts up, or how you give your sandwich away to Omar sometimes when his lunch money runs out." Eli ducked his head. "You don't have to be the same person to have the same heart, mijo," she said gently. "You've just made more space for it." They finished eating, and as Maria washed the dishes, Eli sat at his desk, scrolling through the latest batch of photos he'd taken. One caught his eye, Jason laughing so hard at lunch that juice had come out of his nose. Another showed Rachel sketching at the edge of the park, her notebook tucked against her knees. But it was the last photo that made him pause. It was of Thomas, standing in front of a small crowd, addressing a group of teens from a local community center. He was pointing to one of Eli's photos projected on a screen, an image of a broken basketball hoop in an empty lot, the backboard cracked and the net missing. "He said it was art," Eli whispered. He looked again at the photo, the jagged edges, the loneliness, the stillness that told a story without a single word. Then he turned to the wall above his desk and added it to his growing collection. a timeline of who he was and who he was becoming. His phone buzzed. "Uncle Thomas, Board wants to meet you Friday. You up for it?" Eli stared at the message. Just a year ago, the idea of stepping into a boardroom would have made him laugh out loud. But now? He typed back, "I'll be there." Friday arrived with nerves tucked under Eli's button-down shirt. Maria had ironed it the night before and helped him pick out a blazer that didn't swallow him whole. The meeting was at Granger Industries, a towering building of steel and glass that looked like it had been carved out of ambition itself. Thomas met him in the lobby. "You look sharp," he said, adjusting Eli's collar. "I feel like I'm going to a wedding," Eli muttered. Thomas laughed. "Well, this is sort of a marriage, between ideas and action." They rode the elevator to the top floor, and Eli stepped into a boardroom larger than his entire apartment. Men and women in suits sat around a long, polished table. Some looked curious, others skeptical. "This is Eli Martinez," Thomas said. "He's the reason we're changing the way we run this foundation." The room stilled. Eli swallowed, then stepped forward. He pulled out a single photo from his folder and held it up. "This is where I used to play after school," he said. "It's just an alley now. No hoops, no lights. But it used to be full of kids, full of noise. And when that disappeared, so did a part of our neighborhood." He set the photo on the table. "I think we can bring it back," he said simply. There was a pause. Then a voice from the end of the table spoke. "How?" Eli took a breath. "We start with one park, one lot, one camera. We let kids tell their own stories through photos, through paint, through anything they've got. We give them the tools to see beauty in the places they come from. We show them they don't have to leave to find meaning." Silence again, then a nod, another. Then someone clapped. Thomas beamed. The project launched in October. Eli helped design the first pilot program, City Eyes. It brought refurbished cameras to youth centers and paired kids with mentors who taught them the basics of photography and storytelling. Eli led the first workshop himself. He stood in front of 12 kids aged 8 to 14, their faces guarded but curious. "Raise your hand if you've ever felt invisible," he said. Every hand went up. "Well," he said, lifting his own camera, "this helps people see what you see. And when they see that, you're not invisible anymore." The kids leaned in. Over the next few weeks, Eli watched magic happen. They captured cracked sidewalks and overgrown lots, stray cats sleeping on car hoods, grandmothers waving from windows, a mother braiding her daughter's hair on a fire escape. Their world revealed one shutter click at a time. The photos were put into a gallery downtown. Maria cried when she saw Eli's name on the flyer. Thomas hosted the opening night, standing proudly beside Eli as guests filed in to see what a group of invisible kids had made visible. As people moved through the space, Eli stood by a particular photo, his favorite. It showed a wallet, sitting on a sidewalk, lit by the glow of a street lamp. Next to it, the caption read, "Sometimes the smallest things carry the biggest stories." And beneath that, E.M. He felt a hand on his shoulder, turned to see Thomas, eyes glistening. "You changed more than your life," he said. Eli nodded. "I know." Winter crept in quietly, brushing frost along the edges of the city and icing the sidewalks with a thin film of silver. Eli pulled his scarf tighter as he walked through the familiar streets, his breath clouding the air in soft white puffs. Every corner he passed, every stoop and alleyway seemed to carry echoes of a different boy. A boy from a year ago who hadn't yet known the name Thomas Granger, or what the weight of a forgotten wallet could mean. Snow dusted the rooftops now. Holiday lights blinked in windows. Stores played the same carols on repeat, each note pressing against memory like a fingerprint on glass. He turned the corner into a narrow lane near the old community center. The building had been shuttered for months now, its paint peeling and sign half torn. It had once held after-school programs and holiday food drives. Now it was empty, quiet. But that was about to change. Eli stood in front of the rusted gate and pulled a key from his pocket. A real key, heavy and cool in his palm. He inserted it into the lock and turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the space smelled of time, dust, wood, something faintly metallic. But Eli smiled. He saw more than ruin here. He saw possibility. This was the newest site for city eyes. Thomas had helped secure the lease, and the foundation had committed to the full renovation. Eli had argued passionately for this location, not because it was convenient, but because it mattered. This was his old neighborhood, his block, his history. Over the next few weeks, volunteers arrived, plumbers, painters, kids from the program's first pilot round. Even Jason and Rachel showed up to help scrub floors and haul equipment. Eli painted a mural on one of the inside walls, a swirling, dreamlike skyline filled with hands holding cameras, paintbrushes, and books. Maria came by often, bringing sandwiches and hot cocoa, insisting they take breaks even when they were full of adrenaline and vision. She'd become a quiet icon in the neighborhood, a woman who had endured, risen, and returned with her head high and her heart wide open. One evening, Eli stood on a ladder adjusting a new light fixture when he heard the front door open. "Hello?" a familiar voice called. He turned. "Uncle Thomas." Thomas stepped in, dusted snowflakes from his coat, and looked around. "It's beautiful." "It's getting there," Eli said, climbing down. "Want to see something?" He led Thomas into the back room, smaller, quieter, a future darkroom for photo development. On the wall were rows of printed images already tacked up for review, photos from the newest batch of participants. Neighborhood scenes, portraits, moments that would have gone unseen, unnoticed, had it not been for a camera in a child's hand. Thomas moved slowly down the line of photographs, stopping at one that showed an old man feeding pigeons in the park. "He comes every day," Eli said. "Same bench, same coat, barely speaks." But someone finally asked if they could take his picture. He said yes. Thomas nodded. They saw him. They did. Thomas turned. "Have you thought about speaking at the opening next week, when we unveil the space?" Eli hesitated. "You think I'm ready?" "I think you've been ready for a long time." Eli smiled. "All right, I'll do it." The grand opening drew more people than they'd expected. Families, neighbors, city officials. Even a few reporters. Cameras flashed. Voices buzzed. The smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the newly refurbished halls. Eli stood near the front, heart pounding. He wore a pressed shirt and slacks. Rachel had loaned him a pair of polished shoes. Thomas introduced him with a few warm words, then stepped aside. Eli took a breath, walked up, faced the crowd. "My name is Eli Martinez," he began, "and this place used to be my future. Then it shut down, and we lost a space where we could dream." He paused, his hands steady now. "Then I found a wallet. It sounds silly when I say it like that, but I did, on the street, worn and forgotten. I could have kept it, walked away. But something told me to look inside. Something told me it mattered." He looked at his mother and Thomas in the crowd, then at the wall behind them, filled with photos from children across the city. "That wallet didn't just lead me to a new school or a better apartment. It led me here, to all of you. To the idea that our stories matter, that when we pick up something someone else lost, we're not just returning a possession, we're returning humanity. Hope." The room was quiet. Then slowly applause began. It built into something louder, stronger, lasting. Eli stepped down, heart racing with something better than nerves. It was purpose. Later that night, as the celebration wound down and people filtered out into the snowy streets, Maria wrapped her arms around Eli. "You make me proud every day, mijo. I learned from the best." They walked to the car, Thomas a few steps behind them. Eli looked up at the sky. Snowflakes drifted slowly down, soft and silent. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't picked it up?" he asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. He opened the car door, let them in, and sat beside Eli with a quiet breath. "I think about it every day," he said. Eli looked at him. "But I believe the universe was waiting," Thomas added, "waiting for the right hands, the right heart." Eli smiled, the kind that rose slow and stayed warm. He no longer needed to carry the wallet in his pocket. Its weight was everywhere now, in the halls of the new center, in the lens of his camera, in the hands of kids who had been given a voice. He'd once thought that life changed in big, thunderous ways. But he knew now it could all begin with something small, like returning what someone thought they'd lost, or finding what you never knew you were missing and holding on forever. Spring returned with a burst of green. Trees unfurled new leaves in slow motion, and flowers poked up from the sidewalk cracks with the kind of stubborn joy Eli had come to understand well. The community center was alive now, not just with art and activity, but with belonging. It had become a home base, a hub, a harbor for kids who had never had a door held open for them before. Eli sat cross-legged on the roof, his camera resting on his lap. From up here, the city looked less like a beast to be tamed and more like a symphony to be listened to. The hum of traffic, the distant bark of a dog, the laughter of children drifting from the street below. It was all part of a song he'd learned to hear since the day he returned a stranger's wallet and found the missing part of his own story. A soft footstep behind him made him turn. It was Thomas, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate. "I figured you'd be up here." Eli took the cup. "It's quiet." "Not for long," Thomas said with a smile. "I saw the news this morning. Your City Eyes project got picked up by 3 more boroughs. You're going to need a bigger roof." Eli grinned. "I guess so." They sipped in silence for a moment, both staring out over the skyline. It had been more than a year now, 15 months, to be exact. Time had blurred in places, like an overexposed photograph, but the frames that remained sharp had changed everything. Thomas handed Eli a small envelope. "What's this?" "Just something I found in my office. Been meaning to give it to you." Eli opened it. Inside was the original photograph he'd found in the wallet, the man and woman smiling faintly, dressed in clothes that hinted at another era. "My parents," Thomas said. "Our parents." Eli studied the faces. "I don't know if I see Mom in her." "She was softer in person," Thomas replied, "before everything hardened." Eli slipped the photo into the front pocket of his sketchbook. "Thank you." A gust of wind swept across the roof, tugging at the edges of paper and making Eli squint toward the horizon. "Do you ever think about how things started?" he asked. "Like, what if you hadn't dropped the wallet?" Thomas gave a low laugh. "I don't think I dropped it. I think I left it." Eli turned sharply. "What do you mean?" "I was tired that day. Tired of everything. I sat down on that bench and pulled it out, thinking maybe I'd clean out the clutter. Then I got a call, got up and left it there. I remember walking away, feeling like I'd forgotten something, but not caring. For the first time in years." Eli was quiet. "I think part of me was hoping someone would find it," Thomas continued. "Not for the money, but maybe because I needed to be found, too." Eli stared at the steam curling from his hot chocolate. "That's a lot for one wallet to carry." Thomas looked over at him. "It didn't carry it alone." They stayed up there until the light shifted and the first stars blinked awake. When they climbed down, they passed the new mural on the stairwell wall, an explosion of color, portraits, and symbols all woven together. At the center, a hand holding a camera. Just beneath it, in small white script, "Everyone's story is worth seeing." The months that followed brought more milestones. City Eyes opened locations in Harlem, Brooklyn, and Queens. A traveling exhibit of student photographs began circulating through libraries and museums. Eli was asked to speak at a TEDx youth event, and his talk, part confession, part call to action, went viral. He was no longer the kid who stumbled into change. He was the one inviting others into it. He turned 13 that summer. Maria baked a cake herself, vanilla with chocolate frosting. They celebrated on the community center's rooftop with folding chairs, lanterns, and a playlist that bounced between old-school salsa and Eli's favorite indie bands. Thomas gave a speech. Rachel read a poem she wrote just for him. Jason gave him a customized camera strap that said "Truth Seeker." Eli made a wish before blowing out the candles. He didn't tell anyone what it was, but later, as he stood beside his mother and uncle, watching the city twinkle in the distance, he felt it settle quietly into the world around him. Not like a firework, like a promise. One evening in early fall, he returned to the park where he'd first found the wallet. The same bench, the same trash can, the same curve of pavement that had changed his life. He sat there with his camera, watching people pass by. A man jogged past with headphones. A woman walked a small dog in a pink coat. A kid about Eli's age wandered by, looking at the ground like he'd lost something. Eli stood. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" The boy looked up. "I dropped something, a bracelet. My sister made it." Eli scanned the area, spotted a thin strand of thread beneath the bench. "Here," he said, picking it up and handing it over. The boy's face lit up. "Thanks." "No problem." The boy started to walk away, then turned. "I'm Malik." "Eli? You live around here?" "Sort of." Malik hesitated. "You're the kid from the videos, right? With the cameras?" Eli felt his cheeks flush. "Yeah, that's me." Malik grinned. "That's cool. My school's starting something like that. City Eyes or whatever." Eli smiled. "It's a good thing." Malik nodded, then jogged off. Eli sat back down and exhaled. The city hummed around him, loud and alive. He lifted his camera, looked through the viewfinder, and took a photo of the empty bench. Not for sadness, not for nostalgia, for remembrance. Because sometimes the most ordinary places are where the extraordinary begins. And sometimes the most extraordinary stories start not with fanfare or fortune, but with the quiet, defiant decision to do the right thing when no one's watching. Like a boy who returned a wallet and found a family, a purpose, and a future. Winter returned once more, closing the circle that had begun on that quiet day with the lost wallet. Snow drifted slowly across the city, softening the angles of buildings and burying old sidewalks under a blanket of light. Christmas lights blinked across windows and fire escapes, glowing warmly against the frozen night. Eli sat beside the window of the apartment he now called home, still modest but filled with art, photographs, and the hum of quiet joy that had become his new normal. In his lap sat a book, his book, City Eyes, A Journey in 35mm. The first print run had arrived that morning. The cover was matte black, with a photograph of a cracked sidewalk dappled in golden light and a single daisy pushing up through the fracture. His mother had taken that photo, at his suggestion, during a weekend walk through their old neighborhood. It had become the symbol of the whole movement. The book wasn't just his photographs. It included stories, his own, and those of dozens of young photographers from the programs they'd started across the city, reflections about grief, hope, injustice, joy, and belonging. Every page was proof that the things people tried to ignore had value, that the unseen deserved to be seen. Thomas knocked gently on the doorframe, a cup of tea in hand. "Mind if I come in?" Eli looked up and smiled, always. Thomas walked in, handing him the cup. "I saw the final copy on the table. It's beautiful." "Not just me," Eli said. "It's all of us." Thomas sat down across from him. "That's what makes it matter." They sat quietly for a while, watching the city beyond the frost-laced glass. "Uncle Thomas?" "Yes." "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we never met?" Thomas smiled faintly. "All the time." "Me too." "I think I would have kept living," Thomas said slowly, "but I wouldn't have come alive again." Eli nodded. "I would have built taller buildings," Thomas continued, "but I wouldn't have built anything that lasted inside of me." Eli took a sip of his tea, letting the warmth settle through him. And I think I would have kept dreaming, but I wouldn't have believed those dreams were allowed to come true. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. An envelope, folded once. He handed it to Eli. Inside was a letter, to the boy who returned what I didn't even realize I had lost. Eli read slowly, the words soaked in humility, pride, and something deeper. Gratitude born from a lifetime of loneliness, broken by one act of quiet goodness. The letter ended with a line that made Eli's chest tighten. Because of you, I believe in family again. Because of you, I believe in myself. Eli didn't speak. He folded the letter gently and tucked it back into the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. I think I found more than your wallet that day, he said finally. I think I found where I belonged. Thomas reached over and clasped Eli's shoulder, and I found my way home. Maria called them to dinner. The smell of roasted chicken and vegetables filled the air, and Eli stood, carrying the book under one arm as he walked into the kitchen. They ate at the same table they always had. No linen, no crystal, just warmth, laughter, and stories from the day. Maria teased Thomas about overcooking rice. Thomas claimed it was intentional. Eli told them about a girl in Staten Island who'd taken a photo of her brother smiling for the first time in 2 years and how she cried when it was displayed in a library window. After dinner, they sat on the couch together, a small tree glowing softly in the corner. Eli pulled the photo album off the shelf, the one Maria had started after reconnecting with Thomas. It had pages of birthdays, field trips, dinners, museum visits, and first snowfalls. Pages that looked like a life stitched together from the pieces of broken ones. On the last page there was a new photo. It was of the three of them, Thomas, Maria, and Eli, standing on the steps of the community center they'd rebuilt together. A child held a camera up in the background. Snowflakes were just beginning to fall. The caption beneath the photo read, "Sometimes you don't find the story finds you." Eli closed the album and leaned his head on his mother's shoulder. He thought of that bench again, the weight of the wallet in his hand, the nervous walk up to the tall building, the way Thomas had looked at him like he was both a ghost and a gift. Now he was neither. Now he was just Eli, photographer, advocate, son, nephew, and someone who believed, without question, that kindness could rewrite the world. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the lights glowed. And in the quiet that followed, there was only the soft hum of a life well lived. The end. Spring melted into summer with a quiet grace, as though the world was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. The city softened at the edges, parks filled with laughter, subway cars lightened with music from street performers, and rooftops pulsed with life long after sundown. Eli turned 14 in June, 14 years old, and it felt like the beginning of everything. He was tall now, taller than his mother by a few inches. He'd outgrown the old thrift store jeans and now wore clothes he chose himself. Comfortable, not flashy. His curls had grown out, and he kept them tucked under a cap most days. His camera, the one Thomas had gifted him 2 birthdays ago, was always hanging from a strap around his neck, like an extension of his own body. The City Eyes initiative had grown into something he never expected. It was no longer just a community program. It was a movement. Chapters had opened in 6 cities beyond New York: Chicago, Atlanta, Detroit, Philadelphia, Oakland, and even a small pilot program in New Orleans. Each one started with the same thing, a kid with a story and someone willing to listen. And everywhere they went, Eli's name followed, not like a celebrity, more like a spark. He spoke at schools and galleries. He visited shelters and youth centers. He didn't have a driver's license yet, but people flew him across the country to help start something beautiful. And yet, he still came home to their small apartment in Queens, still washed the dishes when his mother asked, still helped Mr. Liao carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs, still took photos of cracked sidewalks and laughing children and pigeons taking off in a burst of wings. Fame hadn't changed him. It had just reminded him how important it was to stay himself. One warm evening in July, Maria invited Thomas over for dinner. The table was filled with arroz con gandules, roast chicken, sweet plantains, and the fresh lemonade Eli had learned to make just the way she liked it, too sour for anyone else, but perfect for her. Thomas brought dessert from a bakery in the West Village, along with a heavy envelope. After they ate and the dishes were cleared, Thomas set the envelope on the table and looked at Eli. "I've been waiting for the right time," he said. "I think this is it." Eli opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a certificate with gold lettering and a navy blue ribbon tied at the top. It read, "Elias Martinez Granger, founder and director, City Eyes Foundation." Beneath it were legal documents, a revised charter, new board bylaws, and a note from the non-profit lawyers. "It's yours now," Thomas said simply. "The organization, the name, the vision, everything." Eli stared at the papers, hands trembling slightly. "I'm 14. And you're already more of a leader than most adults I've worked with." Maria reached over and smoothed the edge of the envelope. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," Thomas added. "But I want you to know this isn't just a program anymore. It's your legacy." Eli didn't speak for a long moment. Then he looked up, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't want it to be mine alone." Thomas tilted his head. "I want it to belong to the kids," Eli continued. "To the stories, to the places we come from. I'll guide it. I'll shape it. But it has to stay connected to the people who made it matter." Thomas smiled, eyes shining. "That's exactly why you're the right person to lead it." They stayed up late that night, talking through ideas, new chapters, a digital storytelling platform, and a possible collaboration with national museums. Eli jotted notes in a journal filled with scrawled lists and quick sketches. He drew a rough logo, 2 hands holding a camera lens like it was something sacred. That summer passed in a blur of progress. By August, Eli had stood on more stages than he could count. He shook hands with mayors, sat in round tables with CEOs, and once even met a filmmaker who offered to create a short documentary about the program. But through it all, he never stopped photographing. One of his favorite images that season was of a girl in Newark jumping rope in a parking lot while her little brother clapped the rhythm. Her feet were midair, her expression full of joy. He titled it Flight. In September, he returned to school, this time not just as a student but as a mentor. A few teachers asked him to lead after-school clubs. Younger students waved shyly in the hallway. Some left notes in his locker asking for advice. He responded to each one. One afternoon he sat with a boy named Jaden who had just joined the photography club. "My pictures don't come out like yours," Jaden said, frustrated. Eli took the camera gently from his hands and flipped through the photos. One stood out, a close-up of a cracked sneaker on the edge of a puddle, the city reflected upside down in the water. "This is brilliant," Eli said. Jaden looked confused. "It's blurry." "It's real," Eli said. "It's movement. It's truth. You didn't pose this. You just saw it." Jaden stared at the screen. "Photography isn't about perfection," Eli said. "It's about honesty." The boy didn't say anything, but the next day he showed up early with a fresh roll of film and a grin on his face. That's what Eli lived for now, not recognition, but reflection, not applause, but awakening. By November, the City Eyes headquarters had moved into a small building in the Bronx, a repurposed brownstone that now pulsed with life. One floor was a gallery, another held editing bays and computers. The top floor had a studio with natural light and mismatched chairs where kids sprawled across the floor, drawing storyboards and mapping ideas. Eli visited every Saturday. Sometimes he taught, sometimes he just listened. One rainy afternoon, a girl named Sania asked if she could interview him for her school paper. "Sure," Eli said, "but only if you let me take your portrait first." She agreed. The photo showed her in profile, pencil in one hand, recorder in the other, her expression fierce and focused. He titled it, "The Future Speaks." Later that week, she sent him a copy of the article. The headline read, "The Boy Who Saw the World Through a Wallet." Eli read it twice, heart full. Then he folded the page and placed it in the same envelope as his uncle's letter, the foundation charter, and the original photograph from that wallet all those years ago. They were fragments of a story he was still living. And even though the seasons kept turning and the city kept growing, Eli knew one thing would never change. He would keep watching, keep listening, keep seeing. Because someone once said, "Sometimes you don't find the story finds you." And Eli had learned, when it does, you follow. By the time Eli turned 15, he had already done more than many people twice his age. But if you asked him about it, he'd just smile and shrug like it was nothing. He still walked his mother to the subway on Saturdays, still brought his camera to the corner deli to photograph the sunlight on the pickle jars, still sat on rooftops when he needed to think. But the world knew him now. His name was printed in magazines, his photos hung in galleries. His story, how a boy had returned a stranger's wallet and in doing so found the family and future he never knew he was missing, had become a symbol of hope. That winter, he stood at the front of a conference hall filled with hundreds of young people, students, artists, dreamers, who had come to hear him speak. The room buzzed with quiet expectation. He stepped up to the podium, camera slung across his chest, and looked out at the crowd. "My name is Eli Martinez," he began, his voice steady. "And I used to believe stories were something other people told." He paused. "But then I found one, in the middle of the street, inside a wallet." There were murmurs of recognition. Some people had heard the story. Others were hearing it for the first time. "I didn't know who it belonged to. I didn't know it would change anything. I just knew it was the right thing to do." He told them about Thomas, about his mother, about the community center, the program, the first time he saw his photo framed in a museum. "But the most important part," he said, "it wasn't just about what changed for me. It was what I learned to see in other people, their fears, their hopes, their stories." He gestured to the projection screen behind him. Images began to appear. A boy standing in front of a burned-out building holding a basketball. A girl braiding her grandmother's hair in a sunbeam. A hand holding a broken necklace. A cracked mirror reflecting half a face and half a city. "These aren't just pictures," Eli said. "They're truths. They're confessions. They're proof that the smallest voice can say something enormous." He let the final slide linger. A photo of the wallet. The actual one. Scuffed leather, bent corners. A simple thing. "This is how it started," he said. "Not with a plan, not with a dream, but with a choice. To care, to act, to believe that doing one small thing right can change everything." When he stepped down from the stage, the applause rose like thunder. But it wasn't the sound that stayed with him. It was the faces, dozens of them, bright, moved, hungry to begin something of their own. Later that evening he sat with Thomas and Maria at a quiet restaurant a few blocks away from the conference hall. They didn't talk about the speech. They didn't need to. "I signed the lease," Maria said suddenly, lifting her coffee, "on a new apartment, 2 bedrooms, sunlight in the morning." Eli smiled. "You did it." "I think we all did." Thomas nodded, lifting his own glass. "To second chances and third chapters." They clinked gently. That night Eli returned to his room and pulled out the old envelope he still kept in his drawer. Inside it were all the things he never wanted to forget. The letter from Thomas, the foundation papers, the photo from the wallet, the school newspaper article. He added a new piece now, a program from the conference, with his name printed on the cover. He placed it on top, then closed the envelope and set it gently in the drawer. Outside his window the city glowed. He picked up his camera, turned off the light, and began taking photos through the glass, capturing the windows across the street, the silhouettes of people inside their homes, each one a story he might never know but respected all the same. Because Eli Martinez understood now, better than anyone, sometimes you don't go looking for the story. Sometimes it finds you, and when it does, you hold it close. You listen, you share it, and if you're lucky, you help someone else find theirs too.